We here at Alabama University are very pleased to welcome you to this second in a series of symposia on civil rights. The focus, of course, is voting rights as we move toward the 50th anniversary in 2015 of the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights Campaign and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Both symposia, we are very, very happy to say, have been made possible through a mini grant from the Alabama Humanities Foundation and with contributions from the patrons of the National Center. We hope that all of you have picked up an evaluation form and that you will complete this evaluation form and leave it on the table as you exit the program later on today. Okay, we will begin our program with some words of meditation to kind of promote our spiritual alignment for today. And Dr. Robert White, will you come forward for the invocation? Following Dr. White, Dr. Franklin, the Dean of the Library and Project Director for the National Center, will bring greetings.
Let us pray. God, we thank you for life and more abundant life. We thank you for your grace and your mercy that has carried us thus far. God, we thank you for the struggle of former years, and we thank you for the wisdom gained therefrom. We ask that you establish our business this morning. We ask that you clear our heads, transform our minds, renew our minds to receive your wisdom. And it is in your name we pray.
I bring you greetings on behalf of the National Center for the Study of Civil Rights and African American Culture at Alabama State University and our steering committee. It is indeed our honor and sincere pleasure to host this second symposium on voting rights. This historic event is important in that we hear the actual voices of those on the front lines of the voting rights movement, who during their activism in the 1960s made extraordinary sacrifices as students and civil rights leaders. We are also here today to honor those who work to realize the basic principles of our democracy: one man, one vote, and freedom and justice for all, one woman as well. Almost 50 years later, the issue of voting rights continues to be dynamic and wrought with ongoing struggle and contention, thereby making it an imperative that we learn the lessons from these great leaders and preserve their stories for all of us today and for generations unborn. This indeed is the mission of the National Center, to serve as a research center, a living museum, and a repository of information relative to the study of civil rights and African American culture. The National Center would like to thank our partners, the Alabama Humanities Foundation, the patrons of the National Center, Alabama State University, its students, its faculty, and administration for all of your support. As we plan celebrations for the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March next year, this symposium has even greater influence. After all, what is a movement without activists? What is a revolution without revolt? What is change without challenge? Let us hear this truth from those who have laid the foundation, tilled the soil, along with others who have struggled and shared their blood for the right to vote in America. Let us learn and prepare to teach others. Welcome and good morning.
Thank you, Dr. White and Dr. Franklin. The first symposium on civil rights, voting rights, was held in October. And that symposium addressed voting rights through presentations by historians and other scholars. Today's symposium presents voting rights through the experiences of those who were engaged in the forefront of the struggle, mainly as college students. All of these civil rights activities, as you know, occurred when most of us at this point in our, this age, were in college. So we have some students from their college years who were very, very active in the civil rights struggle, especially in the voting rights campaign. Last week's Civil Rights Summit at the Lyndon Bain Johnson Library and Museum highlighted some of the current issues and challenges surrounding voting rights right now, right today. You probably remember, those of you who maybe were at home like I was watching all this stuff, you probably remember President Obama's keynote address on Tuesday, April 8th. I'd like to quote a memorable statement from his speech. He said, "History travels not only forward, it can also travel backward and sideways. So we must be ever vigilant in securing the gains we have made and make more gains for the future." I'm sure you can relate to that, given all of the, I guess we'll call it, voter suppression activity that has taken place over the past few years, especially since President Obama has been in office. President Obama also spoke at, he was a keynote speaker at Sharpton's National Action Network Convention in New York later in the week. And he said, "The right to vote is threatened today in a way that it has not been during the 5 decades since passage of the Voting Rights Act." Now, we all remember what the Supreme Court did in June. That decision knocked out, a significant portion of the Voting Rights Act that was signed into law by President Johnson. So we have two acts, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now all of these things are being challenged today. So what we want to do is to remind, especially our young people, of another quote that I heard last week. "Freedom is never won. Each generation must win it over and over again." And then another quote, see, I've been listening to all this stuff. "The work of civil rights is democracy maintenance." And these are some things, I think, that we really need to remember. So the one purpose that I have decided is a good one for these symposia that we do here is the work of democracy maintenance, and it's the work of those of us who are still here who remember what happened back then. It's our purpose and our function to let the young people that are coming on know that freedom has to be won by each generation over and over again. That's what we have to be about. Dr. Robinson is going to give us some background, start context, and talk more about the occasion, about why we're here today and why this is so important for our future. Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. It is my responsibility, good morning, to provide some historical context for today's conversation. And I do that, again, keeping in mind the contemporary issues we face surrounding voting rights. I want to first turn our attention to the context for voting rights in terms of, particularly in the state of Alabama. In the 1901 Constitution, there were a number of provisions that severely limited the right to vote, a number of disenfranchisement provisions. In actuality, the 1901 Constitution was written to disenfranchise the black population. So the literacy test, understanding clauses, poll taxes, a number of devices were written into the Constitution of 1901 in order to limit black voting throughout the state. And it effectively accomplished that. 96% of the black voters who had voted prior to the 1901 Constitution were disenfranchised. So you had about 180-some-odd thousand black voters throughout the state in 1900. And you had about 3,000 in 1903. So the 1901 Constitution was effective and effective almost immediately. The movement towards enfranchisement or re-enfranchisement took place through the whole half of the 20th century. There was a constant effort to empower black people politically throughout the state. These efforts were most effective in the urban areas, Birmingham, Mobile, Montgomery. They made steady strides towards regaining the right to vote. But in places like Perry County, Wilcox County in 1960 had no black voters, although it was a majority black county. Lowndes County had no black registered voters, although it was a majority black county. So in the rural areas, particularly in the Alabama Black Belt, a vast majority of the population, the black population, was in fact disenfranchised. We move towards, and we look at the organizations that were created to challenge not only racial discrimination and segregation, but also to challenge the disenfranchisement of the black population. And we look at one of the key organizations, aside from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, we look at the Montgomery Improvement Association. And this is important because the MIA sets the agenda or sets the stage for the modern civil rights movement in several critical ways. One, it marries this idea of nonviolent resistance and litigation, and successfully overcoming the bus boycott. Two, it sets the template for the SCLC. The SCLC is born from the Montgomery Improvement Association. Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, and others associated with the MIA wanted to do for the whole South what the Montgomery Improvement Association had done for Montgomery. And so you have the establishment in 1957 of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And again, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, pretty early on in 1957, Martin Luther King gives a speech called Give Us the Ballot. And he's looking at and focusing on electoral politics and the right to vote as a key factor in the first-class citizenship of African Americans. 3 years later, in 1960, the SCLC really gives birth Ella Baker, who you see on the upper right-hand corner, works as executive director for the SCLC. She calls a meeting at her alma mater, historically black, Shore University, and she corrals or calls together students, college students, high school students, who had been involved in a series of sit-ins throughout the South in 1960. Students at Alabama State were involved in those sit-in movements. And students from Alabama State, along with hundreds of students from throughout the region, traveled to Shore University, and they established the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee has to make a decision about its future. It initially embraces an attack on segregation, but it starts to look at more clearly and closely the idea of enfranchisement in the vote and working in communities to help people, black people, gain the right to vote. The SNCC, really, with the NAACP and the SCLC were mainly focused in urban areas, SNCC started to look at rural areas. The most difficult places for enfranchisement for black rights throughout the nation. They looked at the black belt in Alabama, the Mississippi Delta, Southwest Georgia. So SNCC really took root in those places where black people were the most depressed. In 1963, February, SNCC sets up a campaign or project in Selma, Alabama, through Bernard Lafayette, the gentleman you see here. Now also, Bernard Lafayette had been a member of a student group in Nashville, Tennessee, and he had been associated with Diane Nash, you see in this picture, and James Bell. Both Diane Nash and James Bell did like a lot of students. They migrated from SNCC to the SCLC. James Bell and Diane Nash had been active in the Birmingham campaign. When the 4 little girls were killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, they took it personally. And they resolved to do something concrete about it. They came up with what they called the Alabama Project. And the Alabama Project sought to enfranchise the people of Alabama so they could use the ballot to provide protection for their family and their children by selecting their local sheriffs, their legislative boards, the city councilmen, and the like. And so they launched the Alabama Project. The Selma campaign and what happens in the Selma Montgomery March comes out of the Alabama Project. However, SNCC is still in Selma, right? SCLC and Martin Luther King arrived in Selma on January 2nd, 1965. SNCC had been there for 2 years, on and off. A whole series of protests that occurred even before the SCLC got to Selma. But it was a change of watershed when Martin Luther King arrives in January of 1965, and he catapulted the Selma campaign onto the national stage. One of the protests that occur in an adjoining county, in Perry County, involves a night protest that resulted in the shooting death of Jim Lee Jackson. And out of that shooting death of Jim Lee Jackson was a suggestion to march the body of Jim Lee Jackson up Highway 80 and place it at the steps of the state capitol as a protest against the brutality exercised by the state of Alabama. And that suggestion morphed into what we know now as the Selma to Montgomery March. Okay, we all know, and have seen these scenes of Bloody Sunday, the state's attack on the peaceful march as they attempt this march from Selma to Montgomery. And then 2 days later, when the Ministers' March is called, and when I say the Ministers' March, Martin Luther King invited, after Bloody Sunday, ministers from all over the nation to come to Selma and to march from Selma again to Montgomery. And they initiated that march, but Martin Luther King, in sort of a prearranged or a deal with the state and federal government, decides not to conduct the complete march, but to march to Edmund Pettus Bridge, kneel, pray, and then turn around and head back to the Brown Chapel Church. The young people in SNCC saw this as a setup. They saw this as a capitulation, and there was significant conflict between the SCLC and SNCC over this turn of what young people call Turnaround Tuesday. And so SNCC and its executive director, James Foreman, decides to migrate to Montgomery. The SCLC by and large stays in Selma. In Montgomery, SNCC opens up what they call the second front. A group of students out of Tuskegee, the Tuskegee Institute Advancement League. Their president was a graduate student, George Ware. There's another face, I'm not sure if you recognize that person. That's Dr. Gwen Patton. They were part of the leadership of the Tuskegee students, and some 800 students from Tuskegee migrated or traveled to Montgomery to participate in a series of protests in Montgomery. They opened up a second front in Montgomery, and another front remains in Selma. There are students at Alabama State who joined that protest. And one student is Dorothy Frazier. She's the charismatic student leader at Alabama State who organizes students and works with SNCC to provide mass support for protests in Montgomery. And we'll talk to, we'll hear from Dorothy Frazier later this afternoon. I couldn't decide on which picture I wanted to use, so I have several pictures of Dorothy Frazier. The students, Alabama State students, were primarily the Tuskegee students, are trying to petition the governor, and they are surrounded at the state capitol, in front of the state capitol. The governor refuses to see them, and they resolve to stay in front of the state capitol until the governor sees them. They stay there all day and throughout the night. They have to use the restroom, and they do in the middle of the street, and it gains the name, the Great Peon or the Toilet Revolution. But it was one of those episodes in this campaign. Several days later, as students, now this is spring break for students all across the country. At the same time, Martin Luther King puts a call out for students, for ministers to come to Selma. James Foreman and SNCC puts a call out for students to come to Montgomery. And so hundreds of students from all over the country descend on Montgomery in support of the Voting Rights Campaign. Another 7,000 students start to protest at the nation's capital in support of this campaign. And then students all over the nation are protesting in cities throughout the nation at the behest of SNCC. I believe the person in the center that's holding up this young lady, I don't know if I can show you, that is Willie Ricks. And this is on Jackson Street in Montgomery during the Jackson Street melee. I think Willie Ricks dubbed it the Battle of Montgomery. And so the next day, the whole civil rights leadership, Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, James Foreman of SNCC, Jesse Douglas, the albino minister, the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. This lady here is Dorothy Frazier, standing next to, in between Ralph Abernathy and someone else. There's a gentleman here with an Alabama State shirt on. This is a march up Jackson Street. And they marched to the county courthouse where there were negotiations about the previous day's violence. And they, for the first time, Reverend Martin Luther King comes out of the negotiations at the Montgomery County Courthouse and announces that the federal court, Judge Frank Johnson, has just lifted an injunction against the Selma Montgomery March, placed an injunction on the state of Alabama, and so the march will be able to continue. He announces that to some 4,000 students and protesters outside the county courthouse. And so the march, the Selma Montgomery March, commences on March 21st, 1965. We see a scene here of the city of St. Jude, where the Night of the Stars occurred on the night of the 24th. The city of St. Jude was the fourth of four campsites that the marchers stayed at on their track from Selma to Montgomery. And then, of course, Reverend Richard Boone, who worked with the National Center and was really instrumental in helping the National Center secure the interpretive center for the Selma Montgomery March here in Montgomery. Reverend Richard Boone led students from Alabama State, almost 1,000 students, to march from Alabama State to join those marches coming in from Selma and to complete the march to the state capitol. And then, of course, you have the culmination of the Selma Montgomery March at the steps of the state capitol, and Martin Luther King gives his famous God is marching on, or I have a dream speech.
How long not know?
How long not long? I'm sorry. Thank you. And then of course on August 6th, Lyndon Baines Johnson signs the 1965 Voting Rights Act into law, and it changes in very fundamental ways this nation and the politics of this nation. I do want to say, in the aftermath of the Selma Montgomery March, all of these entities, the Alabama State students, the Tuskegee students, the SNCC and SNCC are changed irrevocably. And SNCC becomes much more reactionary. They have been brutalized in countless cities and hamlets throughout the South, and they are much more radical and looking towards a more revolutionary standpoint. The SNCC shifts its focus from the South and heads to the North and takes on an anti-war posture, and so it changes drastically. The Tuskegee students return to Tuskegee as full-fledged civil rights activists. There's a series of protests that occur in Tuskegee. Sammy Young, a student, is killed at a gas station, and the movement explodes in Tuskegee. The same thing happens at Alabama State in the aftermath of the Selma Montgomery March. I hope that I gave you some background as to the totality of this campaign, this voting rights campaign, and I wanted clearly to place into context and the focus the role of these various organizations. I now defer to my colleague, Dr. Dorothy Autrey, and to begin or commence our panel discussion.
Okay, Dr. Autrey, I'll introduce the panel, please. We have two panels today. Our first panel centers on student activism in 1965. And Dr. Autrey, of course, is the moderator for this panel. Dr. Gwen Patton is one of the panel participants. She was the first female Student Government Association president at Tuskegee Institute. She was a militant student leader with the Tuskegee Institute Advancement League. In March of 1965, she helped to lead 800 Tuskegee Institute students to Montgomery, where they participated in several voting rights demonstrations leading up to the Selma to Montgomery March. Patton was also active with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Okay, Mr. Willie Ricks. Mr. Ricks, I'm sorry, was the fiery field secretary with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC. He helped to organize sit-ins, marches, demonstrations throughout the South during the 1960s. He was particularly effective in coordinating student protests in Selma, Tuskegee, Montgomery, and on the campus right here of Alabama State University. This fiery orator is credited with initiating popular use of the term Black Power during the Meredith March against fear in 1966. So I give you the panel, and we would also kind of believe or imagine that Dr. Robinson was one of these college student participants too, because he is so well versed in this movement. But we attribute that to his talents and his skills as a researcher and an archivist and all that. So he has given us an excellent background. Put all of this in context. So now we give you the foot soldiers. I think you call them, right? Of the Okay. Dr. Autrey.
Good morning. I'm going to introduce the panel in a more general way, but I'll get right into the questions. I think it's already been done. We are very well pleased to have this morning two living tributes to a generation of daring and bold, courageous frontrunners in the battle for freedom. We don't realize the value of such persons sometimes until they're gone. So before we even start, can I have you stand in tribute to this generation, these two persons and everyone else involved in this wonderful movement? Bring you back to the question at hand. So I want to start with identifying Dr. Patton as right now the archivist, chief archivist at Trinity State Technical College. Just also realize that. Okay, Dr. Patton, first question. Can you tell us about maybe your early introduction to racial discrimination as a whole? They should be.
Hello. Work.
So talk about how you introduced to racial discrimination, please.
Okay. Two things I must say, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Bernard Lafayette was assisted by his first wife, Codia Lafayette. And it's important for us to make certain keep women as part of the leadership, especially in SNCC, because we had a lot of strong SNCC women. And secondly, the march that didn't turn around, which I'll get to at some point, I had prepared remarks, but anyway, we'll see how that works out. I was a part of the leadership planning committee, along with James Foreman, upstate, Dr. Martin Luther King of SCLC, and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and others. And we have been pre-planning in Birmingham, Lady Gaston Motel. And it was decided democratically, you have to understand, SNCC believed in consensus. And when a decision is made, a decision is made. And after Bloody Sunday, it was decided that we would kick off from Selma that Tuesday. And my role as student vice president at Tuskegee, the first woman elected, because we were in World War II, we appointed a woman, because we didn't have any men on campus that much, because we were in the war, was to organize the East Black Belt, Macon County and Bullitt County. And we were to kick off on Tuesday, and the East Black Belt was to meet the West Black Belt that Thursday or that Friday. And when Dr. King turned around at the foot of Edmund Pettus Bridge, we were horrified, angry, being young, idealistic, invincible, and a decision had been made by the vote. How did you change that consensus without touching base with the rest of the group? We thought that was the most dictatorial, the most violent thing that could happen. So Tuskegee students said we will march on, and we became known as the march that wouldn't turn around.
Dr. Patton, answer. You have prepared remarks. Can she do that, Dr.? Let's do the questions. Dr. Robinson? Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank
Feel
you.
comfortable
I'm
with that.
trying to answer those.
Go ahead. That's fine.
Okay, because I'm looking at the time. When I came to Tuskegee,
which is your first question around racial discrimination. Every summer I came to Alabama, my mother would pack my brother and I in a Foot Locker, and I said that metaphorically. And we would stay there for summer. Mary Allen Noon, my brother, Bailey, were my initial Montgomery contacts, Douglas and Pants, our little group, many favorites, our church member, Dorothy Autrey, and also it was a tight-knit group. When I was a little girl, I guess around 8 years old, my father, I grew up in a place called Inkster, Michigan, which is a Ford factory little community, Ford Pinnacle. And it was, segregated, blacks on one side, whites on the other. And it was a hamlet. And my father got sick of the muddy streets and so forth. So he coalesced, worked with the white people of Inkster. I'm 8 years old now. And working together and observing him, incorporated our hamlet into a city. This whole thing, we need to have our own black, because we were the majority in number of population. City council, mayor, chief of police, and control of the parks, and all of that. So that's my first conscious introduction around politics. I think I'm 7 or 8. Then one summer I come to Montgomery, and every Sunday after Sunday school and church, Hope Street, we would ride the city bus to the end of the line and back. The bus stopped in front of my maternal grandmother's home on Hope Street, open early. And I'm the eldest of my first cousin, I only had one, and my brother. And I'm Boston. So I decided they wanted some ice cream. So we got off on our way back home at the square. I know what the square is downtown. And I've always liked a lot of water since I was the infant. And we go in the Liggett's truck store, those of us who are older, who remember Liggett. We order the ice cream cones, and I want a cup of water. And 3 cents for this cone, paper cone. Sit on the stool and drink my water. And the soldier, and I don't say that as a metaphor, told me to get up and call me a pickaninny. I didn't know what a pickaninny was, but I knew it was an insult. So I looked at her as any little 8-year-old, 9-year-old little girl who looked her meanest, and poured a cup of water on the counter. And told my cousin and my brother, let's go, we stand down. And when I got home, my grandmother was waiting, and I told her what had happened to me. And she loved me tightly and told me I was the most beautiful child in the world. And when the Lord made me, he made no other. And a whole lot of folks since then told me they're so happy that he did. The way, I didn't know, I could not sit any place on the bus. You didn't have to remember I'm an instant coming down here. My grandmother would get on the bus before my brother and my cousin and me, as if to survey the bus. And then she would come off and tell us to sit in the back seat, the long back seat, and look out the big window and watch the scenery go around backwards. That was just so exciting. And of course, being obedient, we did that. I had never an idea that I could not sit anywhere on the bus. Most of my family members had cars, so the bus ride was not the treat. So that was that, introducing to civil rights. So that I come to Montgomery, I worked with Rufus Lewis, many of us know that. I'm 8, 9, 10 years old, 11. and he's in voter registration. My grandmother's house, grandparents' house on my daddy's side, on the east side, which is the bloody side, since it was next to the college, had a citizenship school. So I did citizenship classes. As a kid, I didn't play school, I did school. And helping my elders in the neighborhood learn how to fill out the literacy test. And you talk about genius. Our people are the most genius, they're brilliant. Some could read, some could not read very well. And I had the answers, of course. And they count the number of words in a sentence on a line. And then knew what answer to put. Brilliant. I mean, all kinds of brilliant ways. And of course, remember, if you know old folks, you know, they print in blocks. You know, when you see that, and I had to just teach them how to connect those blocks to make it look like it's cursive in terms of their signature. So I did that. And Rufus Lewis was one of the best organizers in the world. He was a sociologist. We had a form for everything. Everything. And we had citizenship schools or voting clinics. I worked in that. On my mother's side, on the west side, my grandmother was the block captain. She would go out and tell people, you know, to go register to vote and so forth, and then send them or refer them to the voting citizenship schools or the voting clinics. So I grew up with that kind of understanding. And then, of course, the Montgomery bus boycott. And it was Rufus who made it certain that voter registration, we do have the flow chart, that voter registration was a key standing committee, not an ad hoc committee, of the Montgomery Improvement Association. Voting has always been a priority, as Dr. Robinson mentioned, since the 1901 Constitution and the grandfather clause. The grandfather clause was so low down that your grandfather had to have fought in the Civil War on the side of the secession in order to be a registered voter. So that knocked out some of the white folks. But it knocked out all of the black folks. None of our grandparents fought in the Civil War. Great. So I come to Tuskegee with that kind of backdrop. And I'm going to start reading my prepared speech and let me know what I need to say. The National Guard stood at the entrances of Tuskegee Institute. We stopped. Somehow the guards mistook my grandmother's nod to my cousin to drive on through Lincoln Gate as an acknowledgement to them. They nodded to her. It disconcerted me. My grandmother slightly turned her eyes to them with a pleasant yet placid smile as my cousin drove on through the gates. I blotted out the military salutation. I had been taught by my father to always courteously dismiss whites in authority. Otherwise, depending on their personal situations and moods, it could mean serious trouble for a Negro. I smiled to them like my grandmother as my cousin drove on to James Hall. As you remember now, any deal that's been along, you know, a lot had the school desegregation, 1964, 54 had been done. And so the whole nation, the black community in mass, or not, was ready, you know, becoming more and more conscious. Later I learned that the Guard had been called up because Negroes were exercising their new 1954 legal right to attend the white public high school in the Tuskegee community. The case was Detroit versus Macon County. So youngsters who want to look that case up. The Alabama Guards, who in the main promptly supported the segregationists, Governor George C. Wallace, were now asked to protect Negroes from the segregation. Why the guard presence in a county with a population 87% black? Surely we as citizens could carry out the law of the land. My search for answers led me to the periphery of a very small, close-knit underground student movement. I read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, a former student at Tuskegee Institute, and wondered why he was not on the ballot. I met Dr. Paul Puryear, a political scientist, who was undergoing polite ostracism by his superiors in the administration. Everybody said he was a scholar, an exceptionally brilliant teacher. His only infraction was that he dared to venture from the sanctuary of the academy to vie in mayoral elections downtown, the province of the white city fathers. The underground student movement clandestinely circulated leaflets, quietly exchanged ideas, and discussed the matters of the day over chessboards. Eagerly kept abreast of African developments towards independence, envisioned what it would be like when the sleeping so-called model city of Tuskegee woke up to the nightmare of the glaciality in white America. The guards slept in the quiet of the night. So did Dr. Paul Purdy. Our movement scored a victory and suffered a monumental loss. I did not know that an unconscious skill had been effected until years later. I became a cheerleader. When out studying, my thoughts created intricate patterns to cure the golden tigers onto me. I divorced myself from the fact that my grandmother's house was the home of freedom fighters of the SNCC. James Bevel and James Owen Clemens lived in my grandmother's rented house on Council Street. The house still stays, and it was their freedom house. I put aside my sit-in and freedom ride experience. I obliterated the site of the Mother's Day massacre, which had happened a week before in Birmingham, and was now acting in Montgomery as the local mob beat them to a pulp. And which I like to add, when we have a historic marker here in front of the home where they housed or gave refuge to the freedom riders, near the Harris family home. But also the home out in Madison Park, and that's a story I need to tell at some point, at the Reverend's Bank. And Madison Park was a plantation owned by the Maids and then bought by the Madison family, Eli Madison, 674 acres, paid for in full in 1881. It's a remarkable story. One way in and one way out. No white folk dare go up in there. None. They had their own police, their own security, long guns right there in Madison Park. That's a whole nother story. I will skip and go on. The march, Tuskegee already had a movement on campus. We had citizenship schools going on out in the county, places like Little Texas, Society Hill, and so forth. And I taught in those citizenship schools. We have a TCA, the Tuskegee Civic Association, under Dr. Willie. SNCC had already, the Tuskegee students had already organized TIAL, Tuskegee Institute Advancement Committee. They nominated me to be what we call the direct action chair. SNCC came on campus. We liberated that campus. SNCC could stay on campus, stay in the dormitories, even dining hall, go to class, do anything they wanted to do. Because we students said so. And Dr. Foster, our president, did not know how to handle it, except that he knew we were brilliant. And he was the one who called us to Eastern High School, to the librarian at the school. She had been a graduate from Tuskegee. And said, don't ever send another Gwen Patton down here again. But it wasn't like, it was tension, but it wasn't adverse. Tuskegee had its own little class system. Working class and poor kids swam in the Negro pool on Monday and Wednesdays. And middle class and VA professional kids swam in that same Negro pool on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But that had to stop. Dr. Foster had Christmas parties for the faculty and the professional class on one day, and then another Christmas party for those who worked in the laundry and in the dining hall on another day. That had to stop. So students got together, we all black up in here together. While you having a class system within the cast. And this is not a model city. We ran a man who was brilliant out of here. And we're going to have to deal with the internal contradictions of the black community. So when Smith came on campus, that's how they found us. Very conscious, very sharp. We had read Beckenham, Abel, Kant, Kierkegaard, freshman year.
Wow.
Freshman year. You know, I did a paper on marriage and family, and I had a cousin, in-law, who was gay, who was married to my blood cousin. I knew he was gay, my brother knew he was gay. Back in the day, we called him a sister. His name was Robert. We loved him, and he had a baby. It was a contradiction to us. So I had to understand this thing. And so I talked to him about it. He talked to me about San Francisco, the magazine press, and all of that. And I want to write a paper on this. And I go to the catalog to look up homosexual, I learned that fancy word. And it had it under deviant psychology. But I didn't think anything was deviant about Robert. So that's my sophomore year. We're looking at the whole question of sexuality and orientation and so forth. So we were what you would call scholar activists. So we coined that word. Smith came on campus. They saw how bright we were, and they immediately made us their peers. Immediately. And also listened to us, because they wanted us to have a SNCC chapter, Friends of SNCC. Well, I came out of Montgomery, and we had a Montgomery Improvement Association, not a SCOC chapter. They refused. They kept their own identity. So I was the leader on that. In terms of, we're going to stay TIAL now. We're going to be peers underneath. Nobody's going to be subsumed under anybody. And SNCC accepted that. And so here we are. And then getting back to make it relevant to the march that Brother Love here talking. I hope we talk a little bit about that.
Yes, you can get to Dr. Patton, your involvement in the 1965 March of the students from Tuskegee. We're probably near that question now.
Okay. As I told you earlier, the elite of the movement reneged on what was the democratic consensus to march. So we marched. We start out with about 800. We end up with 300 who stayed. 500 students left. And there was something to behold at that march, right there.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
And we had one crazy white professor from Belgium, because it was cold, it was in March, and rain, it was drizzling. And he wanted to rent a helicopter to drop blankets on us. I left it. that. We had wonderful teachers, Jean Wiley, Maggie McGee. Because see, we had labeled ourselves scholar activists. You didn't cut classes to be in a demonstration. I was student body president now in direct action. We organized students with cars. And you went down to the picket line at the courthouse or at the businesses every hour on the hour. Because we had our own people's transportation. I learned that from Rufus Lewis. Got into a big problem with Sting. Because, you know, we all need to quit and come on, join. Stumpy, you got your degree from Howard, and these kids gonna get our degree. We're gonna get our degree at Tuskegee. The movement, the revolution, cannot deal with dumb people. We have to be smart. We have to learn how to plan. We have to learn how to strategize. Which was one of my concerns for Dr. King with Marge, when Jim Foreman was taking me back and forth to meetings in Birmingham at H.E. Gaston. And oh, by the way, I was never for it. I was never for integration. Still am not for integration. I was for desegregation. You know, my thing was I didn't want to stay in Holiday Inn on my way down here from Detroit. I wanted H.E. Gaston to build some more hotels going up to Detroit. But I've never, white people to this day have problems with me because I am not. And don't judge me by the color of my skin. Oh, yes, you do. I'm not ashamed of my color. When you look at me, you see a black person. And when you see black, you see culture. You see that I have been raised with a set of circumstances that I am not going to deny. And I'm not just criticizing Dr. King, I'm criticizing all of us who don't understand language. My mind is a terrible thing in waste. My mind has never been terrible. English teachers need to rewrite that. It's a terrible thing to waste their mind. These things are important. If we claim that we're right. So anyway, we're going back and forth with our people's transportation. And the term scholar activist became the new concept. Just briefly, me and Montgomery, we can't get to see Governor Wallace. Some of our people are in jail. George Davis, George Ware, I think my boy for a minute. Sammy. And so we decided we're going to sit in front of the council until Governor Wallace comes to see us. Then we got caught up, we never liked the FBI. Then we got caught up standing on state property. And then we got caught up standing on federal property. So we all went to hell, we just in the middle of the streets. And that's what we did. Then I hope you would read Sammy Young's book, who goes into details about all of that.
Don't forget to tell me you go over there to have me.
Yeah, we went to that. That's in my credit stuff. We went over the Dexter.
Took it over.
Took it over. Somebody left it. I guess back in the day, I don't know, somebody might have climbed through the window because we were very, very creative. But when we woke up, the lights were on, toys wouldn't flush, the heat was on.
Surrounded by COVID.
Surrounded by COVID.
In the Dexter Church.
At the Dexter Church.
Okay.
We were very hurt.
They were trying to get us out of Georgia.
So the word got out. Alabama State to the rescue. Here come Alabama State students. I mean, they're strong. They're strong. Georgia up. All that. Read them now. And here we are. Oh, yes, God bless our heart. Don Smith is back. You need to try to get our papers if you can. Here we are in the church.
It's March 1965, right?
1965.
Okay.
March would not turn around. Police surrounded the church. Alabama State students surrounded the church. Ready to do battle. And there was a snake girl there, still lives in Selma, and Pearl April from Birmingham. And had a reputation of Birmingham. Police would pull up this building club, getting ready to get her, whack her over the head. She snatched that building club out of his head. She said, now what you want to do?